Hello and welcome to episode 7 of our import-export file breakdown. Today we're going to be looking at the FBX format. It's a heavyweight option for transferring rigs, animations and full scenes between different 3D tools. If you're working with characters or animation pipelines, FBX is a format you'll encounter often. So what is it? FBX, which means FilmBox, is Autodesk's format which stores meshes, materials, cameras and lights. It supports rigs and constraints and supports animation. So when do we use FBX? This is a format for animation workflows, VFX pipelines, full scene transfers and rigged characters. The pros of using FBX is it supports a wide range of data types, is widely used, it is great for animation, and it can also be written in binary or ASCII format. The cons of using FBX are there are multiple versions of FBX, it can be heavy and complex, along with not exporting curves, which some animations might rely on. So now that we've looked at FBX, FBX is the standard for rigs, skinning and animation, carrying skeletons, weights and keyframes. It's feature rich but can be version sensitive. I know that I often use FBX 2018, and for the practical demo I'll export a rigged character, test a round trip import and show the exporter settings along with anything else that FBX is capable of exporting as well. So now that we've gone through FBX in theory, we can now go through FBX in practice. So what we're going to do is, like all of our other files, we're going to make a collection called FBX. And that is because we've got a good number of things that FBX can keep. So at first we're going to make a sub-collection. I'm going to call this FBX Meshes. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a cube, basically. We're just going to put that on the Y somewhere. We're going to go to our material preview, and what we can do is bring our shader editor into half of it, and then we'll just call this cube material. And we're just going to make this like a soft yellowish. We're going to turn the roughness down a bit, turn the specular up. Maybe include transmission because we are looking at what we can get. Maybe not 100%. 732, that'll do. Ooh, that looks wild. Anyway, so what we'll do is we'll bring in another cube and we'll call this our dual texture cube. So dual texture cube, like so. We'll call this our singular texture cube, like so. And then what we'll do with this cube is we'll just cut it in half, well, give it a loop cut to cut it in half. So what we can do is we can have our material that's basically cube top, and what we'll do is we'll just make this one slightly emissive, so we'll make it 0.5, we'll make it a softish red-ish, and then obviously we're going to have to make it so this is also that colour. We'll bring the roughness down a little bit, we'll maybe put the specular up. And then what we'll do is we will now select the bottom half, like so, and then we'll just press the plus button and we'll make a new one called cube bottom. And what we'll do is assign that, and then we're going to make this metallic. We're going to make it, we'll make it a bit rough, and then we'll make it not as specular. And then what we can do is make it blue, say. It looks like one of those old school erasers. Fair enough. So yeah, we'll keep emission on nothing, or maybe like the littlest bit, like so, and we'll keep it, we'll make it like slightly green so we can tell that they're both different. Anyway, so we've done that, and then lastly we'll put in one more cube, and then we'll call this cube custom texture, I believe, cube custom texture. And then what we're going to do is we're going to just make an image texture, make a new one, and we're going to call this a dice, for example. Add that in. Forgot to remove the texture coordinates, so it must be thinking that's the default, but not to worry because we can just remove that. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to come in and basically just make a dice. We're gonna call this 1, and then this will have to be 6, and then that will be 2, so this has to be 5, and then that will be 3, so this one has to be 4. If you're wondering why it has to be, it's because apparently with dice, I've seen it in real life I suppose, but opposite sides add up to 7, so 2 and 5 is 7, 1 and 6 is 7, and 3 and 4 is 7. So we're not going to save our texture for now, and we're going to go to our layout. And the other thing that we're going to do is we're going to make this into a shape key. So we're going to remember this as the basis, and then what we're going to do is we're going to stretch this out really far, like so, and we'll just call this stretch. We'll go to frame 50, and then we'll apply that as a value, and then we'll go to frame 1, and then we'll make 0 our keyframe. So there we go. So we've got our meshes. So this will be our cube custom texture, like so. So we've got our meshes. So now we can bring in our camera, for example. So what we can do is we'll make a new collection inside of our FBX, and we'll call this FBX camera, like so. And then what we'll do is we'll come in, make a camera, Control 0, view, camera to view, and then we can just do this, like so. Turn off the camera to view because we don't really need it, and we can also just put that away now, so we can call this our FBX camera. We've also got light, is it? I believe, yep, so we can do our light next, so we call this FBX lights, like so. And then what we'll do is we'll bring in, I don't know, a area light, move that on the Y, on the X, rotate on the Y, then we'll increase the power, we'll turn it orange, I think, turn it orange, go into our render preview, that's looking quite nice. And then what we can do is bring in our point light as well, we'll put that between these two die here, well, rubber and dice. We'll make it blue, green, mint, I don't know what, there, whatever colour that's called. And then we'll just increase the power as well to that, and then we'll just change this in size so we can make it look like a little bit wider and a little bit longer. Yep, so there are lights, and then what we can do next is we can look at our skeleton and rig. What I'm going to do first though is I'm going to make another collection. I'm just going to call this FBX blend shapes, or shape keys, it's either or, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remember that this one is our blend shape, so it can stay there. Yeah, so now we can move on to our rig. So this one might take a while, so we're going to call this FBX skeleton rig. And yeah, what we're going to do is we're just going to make a very basic skeleton, basically. We'll just bring in a cube, add that there, add another one there. And then what we need to do actually is we need to make sure that these are the same thing. So I'm going to select all, Shift D, bring them up a bit, and then Shift D again, and then this is going to be the pelvis, say, so we're going to remove those faces, connect them, like so. And then what we can do is we can basically just, whoops, we can select this again, make sure we select faces, and then we can move on the Y, we'll just move it a bit more in the center. And then what we can do is we can go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then what we can do is also make a bigger one. This will be our head, and then what we'll do is we'll just copy this, move it to the side like so, move the other one to the side, and then select them both, Shift D down, and then I'll select both the bottom ones, and there. We have a skeleton of some kind. So this is going to be our literal skeleton. Probably shouldn't have made one because it's just going to confuse matters further when we have an armature. So what we're going to do with this armature is we're going to go and make sure that it's in front, which we find it should be in here somewhere. oh, viewport display, there we go, so in front. So now, if we go up to our mesh, no matter where we look, it's in front. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make this so it's down here, and then we're going to raise the top up a little bit there. And what I'm going to do is just bring that in up there, and then bring that in just about there. Alright, so these will control the middle. So what we want now is we want to extrude down to about there, I believe, and then we want this to go about here, and then that one to go about there. So we're going to delete these ones because they are just to be in relation with. We don't want them actually controlling anything, so we're going to delete bones, and we've got our lines there. And then what we're going to do is this bone that we're going to have is going to control our bottom of our spine, say. So that's going to be that one, and then we're going to extrude up, and then that's going to control that one, that's going to control that one, and then lastly that's going to control that one. And then the head is going to be controlled by this one, and then what we need is we need to extrude over here. I'm trying to remember how I did this one, so if we just do that there, and then what we're going to do is move this one there and come all the way down there. We're going to delete this one because we don't want it controlling anything. We delete this one as well, and then we're just going to repeat the process and put that over there. I've just realized that we are way out on our their left side, I believe this would be. So delete bone, delete bone. And what we can do is we can select the mesh first, select the armature after, Control P, and we're just going to do automatic weights. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into select our armature, then our mesh, Control Tab, and we're going to go to our weight paint. And what I want is I want the bone to have complete influence on what we are on. So depending on how difficult this is or how much I've got to do, depends on whether this becomes a time lapse or not. So what I'm going to do is just put this into wireframe. So I want that to have absolute control. We want the fall off to be constant, and we can just select our vertices like so. So that is pretty safe, and then what we want to do is turn our weight off with this one. There we are. So that's a dark blue, that's a bright red, so dum dum dum. This doesn't appear to be too bad, so as time goes on we're just going to do this, and then yeah, primarily heads there, that's there, that's there, that's there, that's there, and then we're going to look at the feet here, legs. Right, so we just need to remove leg influence on the torso, as it were, like so, and just like that, and then this one also just like that. So yeah, they control that, they control that, and I believe we can now make it so that that's, I mean, in a sense that shouldn't be controlling the left side, or yeah, their left side. So what we'll do is we'll just turn that off, and we'll just maybe remove influence from there and there. We'll put influence on this one maybe, and then set this one is basically meant to be in control of the middle, I suppose. So just like that, we'll turn it off up there, and then finally for this one we want no influence up here, but we want full influence there, there, and there. Alright, so that should be a mirror in a sense. That slides down. Either way, doesn't entirely matter because this one isn't based on rigging. If you want an episode on that, feel free to mention it. So now that we've come out of here, we can now look at this, and if we move, if I select the armature and we move this, we've got our arm that moves with, and if we move that, so there we go, we've got our rig basically. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring, we're in pose mode, I'm going to bring in an empty, and I'm going to put that to here. I'm just going to make it a little bit bigger, and then I'm going to select this bone in pose mode and add a bone constraint that makes it is it track 2? I believe so. So if we make it go to the empty, it is not track 2, it's IK, it's inverse kinematics, of course it is. So if I just name this empty right hand, and then what we do is we need to make the chain length go to the bottom here, which I believe is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so it's about 6, like so. So now if I move this, we move our rig as well, and then what I'm going to do is, again, this is only to showcase, so I'm just going to do an empty for the foot here, because what I want to do is I want to animate that one accordingly, and I want to make this one follow a curve. So this will be our right foot, and what we want to do is select this, add a bone constraint, IK, and then we're going to move it to our right foot. Like so, and then 0 basically just means it goes to there, 1 means it goes, whoops, 1 basically just means it goes 1 up, and then we want it to go to 2, I believe. 2 is enough, I think. No, because 2 takes us to this one, so yes, we want it on 3, there we go. So basically we should now get influence there. Cool, so that is basically our rig and our empties. So now what we want to do is bring in a curve, bring it on the Y, scale it up by quite a bit, and then put this, say, here. And we now want our empty to follow path. So we want it to follow our curve. Our curve needs to be scaled down. That, if we confirm its location, there, right, so it's because the empty needs to be, this is, I fall for it more often than I probably should, but basically this needs to be at the center, because what we're doing is when we move our empty over here, we're basically offsetting it when we tell it to follow something else. So yes, what we can do now is we can animate our -15 offset there, then at frame 50 we can have it so the leg comes all the way over here, and then at the same time what I'm going to do is I'm going to have our spine, say, sit there as on the rotate, and then what we're going to do is move it back to, say, frame 18. We're going to have our character bend backwards like they're stretching, and then sit there for about 18 frames, then at frame 50 they're going to rotate back on straight up, and what we can do is we can even just clear transform, and then we can do it there. And then while they are leaning back, what I want to do is I want to animate this to go from here, and then maybe just stretch out that way like they're just really gonna like feel good after that stretch. Then what we're going to do is bring this back, and we'll just animate it there. So basically what we've got is we've got this. So we've got our blend shape, lights, cameras, armature and rig, and what we're going to do is we are going to select all, and then what we're going to do is file, export, FBX, make our new folder called FBX like so. We want it to be our selected object, so we want our empty, camera, lamps, armatures, mesh. As you'll see, other, it says curve, metaball, will basically just be converted to meshes. We minus said forward, Y is up as normal, and then geometry. Don't need to do any of this. Armature, we've got that. If we add leaf bones, it basically just adds an extra bone on the end of our armature, just so you know it's the end. And we want our animation as well. So if we go into here and we export as FBX.FBX, then what we can do is export like so. So hopefully now that that's done, what we can do is we can go to our playground. We have this still, which I believe was STL, so we'll just throw them in there. And then what we can do is we can bring in a new collection and we will call this FBX, like so. What we'll do is File, Import, FBX, FBX, and FBX. So what we can see here already is our curve has become a mesh, one would see. So it's got that little triangle. We've got our camera. We'll also see that everything's come out of their collections. So this is pink because it means they can't find the texture. But if we click play, we can see that our shape key or blend shape has appeared. If we look at this and go to our shader editor, we'll see that we've got our cube top, cube bottom, so we can see that our metallic's up, roughness is up. I believe this one had transmission. I don't know if transmission comes over, I don't think it does. But yes, we've got our specular is also at 0.5, so I'm not sure if it does pull everything. I believe that it basically only does metallic, roughness, and emission, because our emission is at 0.5. As you can see, our empty has exported as an empty, and our rig has come along with our skeleton. We can see that they're doing their big stretch. This is our leaf bones that I mentioned, these long ones on the end, so if you don't want them, you can turn them off. So let's look at fixing our texture, and as you can see, our area light has also become a point light. So if we go back to our file types, what we can do is to make everything neater, we can go into our collection, and then if we just call this our mesh parent, for example, then we can select that, Control P, and then set that to object. We can come to our camera and we can call this our camera empty, like so, and then if we just parent that to that, FBX light, so again we can come to it here, we can add an empty and we'll call this our lights parent, like so, select. So when you make these parents, just remember that they will be parented to the one that's currently selected, and the selection is the light orange. So for example, if I just hold shift, like you see me doing there, if I hold the empty and shift the cube is going to be the parent. If I hold the cube and shift to the cube is going to be the empty. If you want to make sure that the empty is the one that's selected, hold Control and select, and then it will make that the active one. So if we do Control P and set to object, we can see that we've got our blend shape empty, like so, and then our skeleton and rig, because we've got a fair amount there, we can just turn this into our rig parent. And then what we can do is we can hold shift to select all of these. Just make sure that you press Control or hold Control when you go for the parent, because that makes it the selected one. So what we want to do is we want to go to our dice and go to our texture paint, for example, and as you can see, we've basically in the export lost our texture. So what we can do now is we can just go back to making it black by doing this. And then what we can do is, like we did before, if we do 15 say, we can make 1, 6, 3, 4, 2 and 5. And what we want to do is image, save as, and then if we just call this dice, and what we can do now is select all, file, export, FBX. Everything can stay the same, but what we'll do is we'll call this FBX tidy. Export. In fact, what I also want to do is do FBX, and I want to remove the leaf bones, for example. So now we can overwrite this, go to our playground, and then what we can do is delete all this. You can see it's a massive mess. Delete that as well. Make sure it's selected. File, import, FBX, tidy. So now we've got our blend shape parent, and then we've got our rig parent, mesh parent, light parent. Must have accidentally gone into naming it empty because that's what it is. Then what we can do is, if we really wanted to tidy up, because we can call this our mesh, that's our mesh collection, because if we make it so this isn't visible, it doesn't make them like not visible, because we'd then have to go into them and do this and this. So what we can do is, if we select the hierarchy, so it's everything in this, and drag it into mesh, then we can hide the mesh collection and do it that way. We've also not got our extended armature anymore, so as you can see these have somewhat shrunk down because if we go to our file types, we were down to here, but they've basically shrunk down because that's how they've been exported as. We've got our texture here, so that was a matter of just saving it and having an actual texture to reference in a sense, because Blender didn't bake it beforehand. And then yeah, our lamps are here. So it appears to be that our lamps become point lamps, but we can just go to area again, and then we'd unfortunately have to rescale it to size. And then the last thing I wanted to point out was, oh yes, so if we wanted to fix this armature, what we'd have to do is just export with leaf bones, but we don't need to do that because we've already got our one from earlier. So if we just bring in our regular FBX, you can see that we do come to the end. So yep, got to pick and choose your battles, unfortunately. And yeah, that is FBX covered, hopefully. So we've covered that it brings our mesh over, our skeleton, our rig. We can see if the weight paint is the same. So yep, so we've got the one in the middle, then we've got the ones on the edges, and yep, so everything appears to come over fine. We've got our textures, we've got our lights, we've got our camera, which is over here. So yeah, everything appears to be fine, and yeah, we can now move on to, I believe it's GLTF or GLB next. So yeah, I'll see you in that one.